The goal of these is to really start helping people understand at a very in-depth level the technologies that are kind of shaping the world we're living in, right? And the ability to learn these tools and technologies, even without any technical knowledge, without having the development knowledge, is a very powerful tool set, and it's a very powerful skill set, and it's empowering people all over the world. And I'm very passionate about sharing that knowledge and information with people. It has changed the way that I interact with technology, the way that I share my story, and the way that I really do everything digitally. And so I think that giving that power to other people is an important part of our development as a society. So we're going to bring in guests and people as we can to help aid in those conversations. Today we're joined by Sean Smith. He is the co-founder of Simple Tiger, an SEO and content marketing agency based here in Sarasota, but they have clients all over the world. He's also the co-founder of CleanCanvas.co, building simple Squarespace websites for businesses, which is why he's here with us today. We're going to compare WordPress versus Squarespace as a platform. He also writes for popular online publications such as Medium, The Next Web, The Huffington Post, Adobe's 99U, Moz, which is an SEO website, Copyblogger, Crazy Egg, and Crew. You can learn more about him at snsmth.com or tweet at snmmth to connect after the show. I don't know if you have cards or whatever on you, but we can get you his contact info after the show if you'd like more information on that. But essentially, I sell WordPress. I'm a WordPress evangelist. We have a software development firm here. The space we're sitting in is called Clear Idea Labs. We have a WordPress maintenance and management business, and so part of that is helping people not have to deal with a lot of the cons that we're going to talk about as we weigh the pros and cons of the different platforms. And Sean is building a business around Squarespace, and so we thought, what a perfect dichotomy here, what a perfect balance to just kind of shoot back and forth and talk about which is better, why, and then a bunch of different things. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you.
What's up? Let's do it.
Thanks for the introduction.
Game time.
Yeah.
So
I also, first things first, I also want to mention that I've got a lot of experience building both on WordPress and Squarespace. And while I'm kind of championing the argument for Squarespace in this regard, I wanted to say also that I've built many sites on WordPress. It's a fantastic platform as well. It's really just about what your needs are and how those can be met and which platform is really appropriate for your specific needs. So I just wanted to get that out of the way up front too.
Yeah. Perfect. So let's start with the real simple why. Why did you choose Squarespace? Why, after having some experience in WordPress, did you make that migration to specifically start a new company around Squarespace? Like, why move over to this all new platform?
Yeah, so I think that WordPress is fantastic if you want to go really, really in depth. If you want to go customize absolutely everything to the T, it's fantastic. And while Squarespace has all of that ability, it also has the ability to just come out of the gate very simplistic, very targeted, very easy to just get up and running really quickly, and have some really great top tier design right out of the gate, and have all the usability that you would need out of WordPress that you would have to go deeper into development in order to achieve. So I saw a lot of businesses finding WordPress and using service providers that weren't very great, building really bad WordPress sites, and having to clean those up as a marketer, as well as hoping to help people's design. I felt that Squarespace was just a much better solution right out of the gate for people to use, to be very SEO friendly, which just to give an introduction as well, I'm an SEO consultant, which basically means I help people rank higher in Google, their businesses. And Squarespace was already set up really well out of the gate for that. I think that WordPress, it takes a little bit more work to get there.
Yeah.
So
let's talk a little bit about the sites, because one of the things that we were going back and forth on is who uses WordPress, right? And that adds a little bit of credibility to the platform itself. So who's on Squarespace? Let's go over some big brands on Squarespace and WordPress so you can see that lots of people are using these websites all around you. Not everyone's using these custom built framework. So
Right, yeah. So some of the people that you might know about on Squarespace are Target. They have some of their sites that are built on Squarespace. Fast Company, a big publication. Wired, one of the biggest tech publications. Lyft, which is a popular startup, ride-sharing startup out of San Francisco. And Hodinkee is a big notable, it's a high-end watch blog, essentially, that also sells watches through their e-commerce platform. They use Squarespace for all of that.
sweet. And then on the WordPress side, you have sites like TechCrunch, The New Yorker, BBC America, Variety, Sony Music, eBay. Obviously not their trading platform, but some of their actual corporate websites. Facebook, surprisingly, uses WordPress for a lot of their websites that are not Facebook pages or Facebook-based web properties.
Applications,
Fortune Magazine, Time Inc., the New York Times, and even Google Ventures. And so there's a broad list, and the Squarespace list goes on, the WordPress list goes on. You can find all that. The only reason we say that is just to show you that you can build as big a website as you want with either of these two platforms. So that, at a high level, will never be a limiting factor on either of these two platforms. So if you're new, trying to figure out what platform to start with, or if you're figuring out like what's going to scale better, both of those platforms are going to allow you to scale pretty much as to the sky, right? The sky's the limit with either of these two platforms. Let's talk about, let's dive into some of the pros, right? So you said from an SEO standpoint, right out of the gate, you kind of get a lot of that stuff baked in.
Right.
And this is where the biggest divergence, I think, is going to be on these two platforms. WordPress is an a la carte platform. And what I mean by that is every piece comes on its own, right? There's 37,000 plugins. It's a ridiculous number. It's almost 40,000 plugins, and with like 900 million downloads, right? And what a plugin is a small piece of code that adds on to the core functionality of your website and allows you to do add a functionality, add a feature, add something to the site that you might not have as part of the core functionality.
Right.
Squarespace also allows for plugins.
Right, but theirs are a lot more tailored, and they're actually built by Squarespace. So
And-
they're a lot less. However, they're a lot more targeted at being very helpful. And you can actually build your own plugins for Squarespace, but you have to use their template framework, which is built on Java, and it's a little bit more like kind of pick whichever one you want. Really easy to it's very easily integrated. However, it is a bit limiting in the amount of plugins that you actually have access to.
In that scope, it's very much like the iTunes store versus Android Play, right? iTunes is a little bit more judicious about who they let into their app store, right? The application gets vetted. There's a little bit more scrutiny into what goes inside of that. That's more of like a Squarespace situation, right? Where you know you're going to get a plugin that works. You know you're going to get a quality plugin when you're with Squarespace. There may not be as many,
Right.
but it's going to work. With WordPress, you may break your website with a plugin, right? You may just install a new plugin and just break your whole website.
Right. As well as WordPress actually puts out updates pretty consistently that sometimes will break these plugins because they're built by developers who aren't necessarily affiliated with WordPress.
Yeah.
So whenever they send out a big sweeping update, 50% of your plugins could be outdated and not work and actually hurt your site.
Yeah, there's no official like update timeline in WordPress, right? There's no like on this Wednesday every week or whatever, this time every week, all the plugins are going to get updated, right? So the WordPress core will get updated, and then your plugin will get updated, and so you'll have all these different things that come and have to be updated at different times. And again, where Squarespace kind of handles all that in the back end. And so again, it just depends on what you're looking for. If you need the functionality of these plugins, if you need a little bit more flexibility in how you need the functionality of your site to work, WordPress might be a better option. But if you're just looking for some cookie cutter off the shelf and not having to worry about a lot of that maintenance moving forward, then Squarespace might be a good option as well, right?
Right. And then I would say that one of the bigger, another one of the big opposites, you'll see these big trends. Like with Squarespace, it's very out of the box, really good. WordPress, it's a bit more a la carte, and you have to set it up like that. another big diverging thing is that Squarespace is built on a software as a service model. So it is actually a pay per month type thing, where you're paying. They're very cheap, albeit they're like $8 a month.
I think they would prefer you.
Right. Yeah, they're very inexpensive. They're $8 a month for a basic plan, and that doesn't include like e-commerce, and then it's $20 a month for like e-commerce and as big a plan as they actually sell. It's the biggest plan that they sell. Whereas WordPress, specifically like WordPress.org, where you would actually be building out your full-on site that is, completely a la carte and has all those plugins and everything, that is free, essentially. You just have to pay for the add-ons and other things that Automatic, which is the company that builds WordPress, has to offer, that are like, kind of security, spam
Backing
protection, hosting, that kind of stuff. So to that point, one of the great things about Squarespace is that hosting is included in that price. You don't have to go to like GoDaddy to set up your like domain. Actually, they offer free domains to anybody who buys a site through them. You don't have to go to like Rackspace to buy storage or to buy hosting. They actually have their own hosting platform that is completely cloud-based, that is set up for you whenever you actually buy a site. And so the great thing about cloud storage, and why I bring that up, is that it has a huge effect over SEO and many other things. So if you actually have thousands of people hit your site, it would have the same effect over your site as if 12 people came to your site. It wouldn't crash your site no matter how many people came to your site, because they have so many different servers set up that it's going to spread the wealth across, that it won't really hurt. Whereas if you're built on a proprietary like server, if you have it on one computer, which is sometimes the case if you're buying storage or hosting from a company, if you have that on your WordPress installation, say you write a blog article that goes viral and it has 12,000 hits in 20 minutes, it could shut off, and then you have no access to your site. It's you lost all of that potential.
Hosting is one of the things. So when you're setting up a WordPress site, WordPress is just a piece of software. You need a computer that's connected to the internet, that's always on, to host this piece of code, so that when I go to my browser and I type in a URL, I end up going, it sends a little signal to that computer to display X on my screen, right? That's essentially what we're doing when we go to websites. And so with WordPress, you have to have your own host, right? You need a hosting company. And a lot of times you'll get into, free hosting, or, an all-encompassing hosting, unlimited, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes those are great just to get off the ground, but sometimes you might want something like a little higher end. You may want like a media temple or a WP engine, or something that gives you a little more
Amazon Cloud, something like that. But it can actually, those can get pricey.
They start getting pricey. And so again, it goes to the usage. But a content delivery network, which is what Sean was talking about, is important because it distributes the load of that website as people start increasing traffic. So as you're looking to scale that website, that hosting is something that comes into play. Now, WordPress does have this benefit factor that it's free, right? It's technically free. The software is free. However, do not misconstrue that to think that getting into WordPress is going to be a free endeavor. WordPress actually can go about, like I pay $400-ish a month to manage and run my website, and that's because of the plugins and the email marketing software that I use.
And I would also like to note too that you're an incredible designer.
Yes.
And so you don't have to pay somebody to design your site.
Yes.
To update the design on your site, to add these plugins, because you're building plugins.
Yes.
You know how to actually do that kind of stuff. So there's an added cost on top of that.
Yes.
Whereas with Squarespace too, a lot of these things you can do on your own. As a business owner, if you have, say, a local mom and pop shop type business that or like a home gallery or something like that you just want to set up a site really quick and throw your products on, it's pretty easy for you to do. You don't actually have to be a very great designer.
So that's where I'll kind of like plant a flag for WordPress and say that the ability as a novice guy, like someone like me, who I have some design skills in Photoshop and I have the ability to create some interesting images and then put these into the back, and I'm sure I could probably design beautiful Squarespace sites too, right? But the toolkit that I'm comfortable with in WordPress and the tools that we use allow me and lots of other people to have that same ability to like have this set of WordPress install, which is maybe a core set of plugins, 4 or 5, 8 plugins that I know are kind of my toolkit, my SEO plugins, my e-commerce, my forms plugin, etc. Just my core kit, and just replicate those, right? And so literally I could flip a website on in a couple hours,
right?
And it doesn't take you very long as a user to get to that point, right? You could get to the point where you're very comfortable setting up, configuring, and building WordPress websites, and getting to a point where you at least have a blank screen to then start putting content. And in that context and in that regard, without the cost is a beautiful thing, because yes, I pay a lot of money to manage my one property, this one real estate that is like my baby, right? But the other ones that I have another 10 or 15 that if I were paying $8, $10, $20 a month for, would be crippling. Whereas I can just throw them on my server, I can throw them on my host, and boom, I got a whole new website, new website, new website, new website, new website. So now I can start building these different properties, so I can start segmenting that audience. I can start putting very tailored messages for each of those URLs. It feels, you start allowing yourself more flexibility in that regard. And I think that's where WordPress starts to become a really powerful tool. So
right, and
right out of the box, Squarespace is like, boom, awesome. The learning curve in WordPress is steep, right? To get to a point where you can actually do a lot of those things. But to just get going in WordPress is not that difficult. And so it takes you a while to get to the point where you can kind of do a lot of things I'm talking about, but it allows that flexibility, right? Whereas you start trying to customize Squarespace, you're going to have to get developers that know what they're doing. It becomes a little more difficult to find people to customize that.
And to that end, I think on the development side, just to give you a little bit of background, WordPress encompasses 30% of websites on the internet. I mean, it is giant. And the amount of community around WordPress putting out documentation and information is tremendous. It's giant. And there are certainly more development shops and designers that are versed on WordPress than there are on the developmental side of Squarespace. And what I mean by that is there is the Squarespace side where you just buy it and it's WYSIWYG editor where you can actually just easily adjust the componentry on the front end.
WYSIWYG stands for what you see is what you get, if you don't know that, right? So if you ever hear that abbreviation, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, is what that stands for.
It's basically just like a drag and drop, essentially, way of styling and designing a website. And that's basically how Squarespace is set up. However, they also have a side which is completely developmental focused, where if, say, I'm a developer, you're a developer, and we're actually wanting to go beyond the confines of what you get out of the gate with Squarespace and the templates, you can build out a lot further. But the amount of people who know how to do that on Squarespace is far less than there are on WordPress. Which, I mean, the good thing is that there doesn't need to be that many that are well versed on it with Squarespace, because you can do so many things on the WYSIWYG drag and drop type style play. However, if you wanted to go really in depth with it, you would have a limited marketplace of the amount of people who can help you with that, as you would on WordPress.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits, I think, on the WordPress side. The community aspect of WordPress cannot be overlooked. The importance of that community, the importance of having that large a network. We go to the local WordCamps here in Tampa, Miami, Orlando, etc. And if you don't know what a WordCamp is, those are essentially like self-organized WordPress conferences that are focused on teaching and sharing and building the community around these technologies. And one of the exciting things about WordPress is that community, in the fact that like so many people are passionate about sharing that knowledge and helping. And as long as there's a willingness to help yourself and at least start search and seek out that information, you're almost always going to be able to find someone that can help you accomplish whatever it is you need to do. For instance, I have this $55 theme that I bought, and these guys support that theme like you wouldn't believe it, with 24-hour support team. So within a couple hours, I'm getting a little CSS, a little piece of code that allows me to modify this site that they're doing for me outsourced, right? I just bought this one thing, which basically bought me a license to access their team. And since they're doing all these things and there's such a big community, we're able to find those resources and get those little cheat codes, if you will, to add a little function, add a little style, modify the site just to get a little bit more refinement towards what you're looking for. And so the ability to just quickly find a little modification, a little hack, a little thing here and there inside of WordPress is going to be a lot more versatile than it will be inside of Squarespace, especially because of that community. And like Sean said, it's actually like 24% of the internet. 63% of all 63% of all websites that use content management systems are on WordPress, which is about 24% of the internet. And those are kind of alarming stats when you think about there's one technology that's powering 25% of the internet, right? It's the biggest social network that most people don't even know about. It was a social network before Facebook, it was a social network before Twitter, all these guys. And so that in and of itself is a very interesting concept, and I think that's not something to be overlooked because Automatic just took, it was like $160 million, I'm sorry, $160 million in venture capital with a $1.16 billion valuation. And this was probably 6 months ago or so that happened. They're rewriting the back end of WordPress. They're starting to adopt new technologies, and I think what you'll see is over the next couple years, WordPress catching up to some of those things that Squarespace, Weebly, some of these other web building platforms are really good at out of the box. And I think in that context, WordPress gives you a lot stronger place to build out a long-term online vision, especially for the ability to pivot and shift and like make on-the-fly changes, you know?
Yeah. WordPress is definitely a bigger company overall, but at the same time, you have Squarespace that just took on like $40 million in funding and has 285 employees who are already kind of ahead of the pack in that kind of forward progressive way that people are building websites. So it's not to say that they would be falling behind.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think that Squarespace is going to stop innovating, right? That's not like what I'm trying to say by any means. And I also think that we probably are looking at the internet in the way that we know the internet, because this is how the internet has been built around us, right? And this is the internet as it exists today. However, I think 5 years from now, the internet is going to be very different than what it is, right? I think we're going to start seeing, and we're already seeing it with platforms like Medium, with what Facebook's doing with their native articles, with their instant articles, what LinkedIn's doing with their own publishing platform. Everyone is trying to aggregate all of this content in these very fast, super snappy, beautifully responsive platforms that allow you to distribute content, but more specifically, that allow those platforms to leverage that data as their information to then create a sales ecosystem or some kind of marketplace out of that. Whereas with WordPress, we are that ecosystem. We are those people. We are that platform. We are that, that part of that structure. And I think that in order to continue to propagate the freeness of the internet and to continue to allow it to expand in ways that it has, that's very important because it allows lots of innovation. You don't have to worry about, being some big megalith corporate structure to make changes or affect the outcome of what we're building, right? Guys like me all around the country, all around the world are affecting what's going on with this stuff, right? People in this room are affecting the things that are happening with this technology. And I think that is a really powerful thing as we move forward and as we see the web progress.
Yeah. So I think that those are the big elephants in the room, those big topics and the diverging elements of WordPress and Squarespace. But I think that whenever we start getting into the deeper topics, like how they differ in SEO and marketing, how they differ in these other topics that we outlined at the very beginning, like how it affects with non-developers and actually developers that dive deep on it, I think that's where it kind of starts separating a little bit more. Actually, it's really just how they adapt those things, because both platforms can actually handle both all of these topics really easily. It's just how they actually handle those.
Yeah.
So starting out, I guess, with marketing, we have Squarespace out of the gate is very well set up for SEO. It is heavily socially integrated, so you can set up all your social networks on it, all of your accounts and everything. Whenever you post a blog post, you can make it shoot out to all of those with customized tags and all of that kind of stuff. It is extremely well set up for its architecture, so that whenever actually bots come to the site and are trying to crawl the site to see what kind of content they should latch onto to rank for people. It's very easily structured for them. And how I mean by that specifically is they have sitemap.xml files that are straight out of the gate. This is getting really nerdy. So those get built right out of the gate, right? Whereas with WordPress, you kind of have to figure that stuff out. There are definitely tools, like there are plugins.
Yes.
One in particular that I would recommend is Yoast for WordPress. That one, I mean, it covers a lot of these things. However, somebody who's not really well versed on SEO that just wants to set up their website for their store, they don't really know. They have to go into that, and they're not going to really show up as well in Google.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, what I was talking about with the power of having your package of plugins and your WordPress, because every WordPress developer, everybody that works in WordPress has their own tool set, if you will, right? The pieces of technology that they use to allow them to do what they do. And typically what that would include is an SEO plugin, a social plugin, a forms plugin, and what Squarespace addressed, and the reason I think there was such a niche or a hole in the market for what they did and why they've grown, is they filled that void, right? Because you were having to come in, and if you just download WordPress and install it off the shelf, it's fairly limited. It started as a blogging platform, right? And so it's really just there to allow you to create posts and put posts online. This added page functionality and all these different things that make up the web now were all kind of afterthoughts in WordPress, and they were parts of the evolution of that platform growing. And so because of that, you saw a hole in the market, which Squarespace and some of these other companies stepped into, that kind of gave you that off the shelf with the SEO, with the social sharing, with all these things kind of baked in. And I think that's why they've been so successful.
Right. WordPress was kind of like if you went into a computer shop or not even a computer shop, like a circuitry shop
like a
in the
Radio Shack.
80s,
Yeah.
and started building all the circuit boards and putting them together, and then essentially Squarespace came in and said, no, we're Apple. We're putting it all in one,
Yes.
and we're going to give it to you in a pretty package.
Yes.
And so that's really how they approached everything. I mean, from marketing to design and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and so I mean, those are pretty core. There was there was one thing you said when you were talking about the marketing that I thought that would be interesting.
Content production, probably. I mean,
the analytics. Make sure we talk about analytics. Yeah, because measuring and understanding what you're doing or what your site is doing or how it's performing is very important, right? Especially if you're going to turn it into a business, or if you're trying to make a business out of it, you need to know, how do I do more of what's working and less of what's not? And so analytics is the only way to do that. And there's another place where kind of off the shelf WordPress is lacking. Their analytics is not as powerful as it could be. You can obviously tie it into Google Analytics and use that tool set. But Squarespace comes with a right out of the back beautiful analytics dashboard that you can dive deep and get all of that information.
Right. I think that it is it's both a pro and a con for Squarespace, because on the back end of Squarespace, so whenever you're in the developer kind of dashboard, you can click on the metrics and you can see how many people have viewed your site, what kind of content they've actually viewed, when they viewed your site, what kind of device they're viewing from, so iOS, if they're on an iPhone, if they're on Android, so you get a better picture of who your actual who your personas are, the people who you're actually reaching, but also at the same time it doesn't go quite as deep as say like a Google Analytics or an advanced analytics tool like even Kissmetrics or something like that. So while it gives you a lot of good high level picture of, yeah, I have a lot of these visitors on my site, these are the kind of content that they're going to, so naturally I want to write more of this kind of content. You don't get to track all the way down to, they came through this page, they left, they came back through, Twitter, they came, they left, and then, all that kind of stuff. So you don't really get, while it is server level data, it's very detailed, they don't really actually give you the ability to filter down really deeply like the other tools do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other tools aren't even set up on WordPress, and you can set those initially. You can set them up, obviously, and you can also set those up on Squarespace, which you should. If you're managing a business, you should definitely have all of the data that you can. to inform your decisions.
Talk to me about, because obviously nothing needs to be said about WordPress's power as a content distribution tool. I mean, that's how they started. That's where their roots lie. So how does, especially someone who's blogged on WordPress and is now blogging on Squarespace, how do they compare? Like, how do you rate those, the interface, the talk to me a little bit about that content creation process in Squarespace versus WordPress.
Yeah, so with WordPress, obviously, whenever you start a site, the first thing, you're immediately able to just start blogging. That's a great thing about it. You can pick one of their beginner templates. You can jump on. You can start blogging. You can start writing. This writing starts getting indexed. It's great. Same thing with Squarespace, except I would say some of the main differences are actually more in the front end of the site in regards to blogging. So if you wanted to set up the blog really deeply with subscriber buttons and a lot of that kind of stuff, you get what they give you. You can do external kind of add-ons through tools like SumoMe that are like JavaScript based that you can set up on your site, and then they can add sharing functionality and that kind of stuff in your own kind of customized way. But I would say that that's the main big difference, is the design on the front end. On the back end, it still feels very actually similar to WordPress. You have you jump in, you have a blog that you go to, it shows all of your posts. You can write up, and then you can make it a draft, so you don't have to publish it right away. But then if you wanted to go ahead and publish it, it has all the tags that you need. You can add categories really easily. You flip over to an options tab, it shows a thumbnail image if you want to put that in, which is what would be shared out to social media, Facebook, that kind of stuff. One great thing about that is it's already set up with some really great technology like Open Graph technology and Twitter cards. So what that means is whenever you share out the post and it has an image in it that's the thumbnail image, the image is shared on Facebook as the post's thumbnail image. That's something that you have to set up after the fact with WordPress. So that alone, posts that have an image on them on average get 50% more clicks than posts that don't have an image on them. So if you want your articles to be getting more reads, chances are you want to have an image tied to it. So that's an easy kind of upsell in their process. And then another thing, as I mentioned earlier, it has all your social media profiles set up already. So you can just click the ones that you want. Say I want it to go out to my Twitter page, but I don't want it to go out to Facebook because it's going to share it to some relatives that have some converging views. So I don't want that. So I'm not going to share it to Facebook, but I'm going to share it to LinkedIn because it's a professional article and I want people to read it that are in my network. So you can easily do that. And then you can just, right when you publish it, ships out, shows on the front end.
Yeah.
I can edit it in real time actually on the front end if I want to. Say somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, that has a typo on it. I can just hit edit right on the front end, edit it, and then hit save, and it just updates really easily. I don't have to go through the back end and all that stuff to do that. I would say that it's very natural feeling if you're used to it. I would definitely say that it took, and that sounds really odd, but I definitely would say that it took a second for me to get used to it, because how you switch between the back end and the front, like editing the site rather than just visiting it, is if you're set up with an account on Squarespace, whenever you're visiting a Squarespace site like mine, if you hit the escape key, it pops to the back end, it pulls the thing out, and then I can see the metrics, I can see the posts, I can read all that kind of stuff. I didn't know that when I set it up initially, so I'm like, how do I do this? And I'm like logging in on Squarespace, trying to edit my site. I didn't know that. I read one article that says you hit escape, and I'm like, this is amazing. I just found that out. It's perfect. So yeah. I would say that there's a lot of, in the same way that, with an iPhone, you switch from an iPhone initially from a phone that had a bunch of tactile buttons here. You're like, I have one button. How do I deal with all this? But then once you start using it and actually get used to it, it's extremely intuitive.
Sure. Which is probably to be said about both platforms. Either one you pick is probably going to have that learning curve, that association curve, that understanding how do you get around, what can you do with it, etc. And so I wouldn't be too intimidated by the learning curve, even though I would say that the learning curve on WordPress is probably a little steeper than it is on Squarespace. I think in Squarespace you could probably jump in and start doing a little bit more of what you want without worrying about where to go to get some of these other things.
I think that, Squarespace is more like, here's the next step. Here, we're going to guide you through this. WordPress is more like the world's your oyster.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yes.
You know, and so while you can, if you're diligent and you Google a lot and all that kind of stuff, and you find all that documentation and you figure out how-tos on WordPress, you can find all of that information. It's just a lot more straight in front of your face with Squarespace, which I think is one of the main things that they do well. From a client side, if I'm selling the person on it, and I'm ready to hand it off to them, it's very easy for me to just give somebody a Squarespace site, and after it's designed, after it's done, they can handle it. And you can publish blog posts, you can do all that kind of stuff, and if you don't like the color that's on your front homepage, you can go into the little style thing and see it in real time, and you can adjust it. Whereas on WordPress, you'd probably have to call somebody up unless you know how to do that.
Right.
Unless you know how to edit styles and CSS and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point too, because we didn't talk about this. We talked about it as if we were using the website. We didn't consider it as if you're handing this off to someone. The other thing to be careful in that context is, what you're charging people to hand off sites that are built in a platform for 8, 9, 10, like some WordPress people do that too. They'll go and this is why WordPress developers get a bad rap, because you get somebody who goes and gets a little plugin, they build a website on some crap hosting platform, and they charge somebody $1,500, $2,000 for this website that's really not stable, it's not optimal, it's not anything. And so, knowing this stuff, at least just in that regard, when you're shopping or figuring out what you're going to jump into, is important. And then if you are doing this for clients, having that, that ability to hand off a site that maybe they can manage more. I know in the WordPress world, a lot of that income comes from managing the sites you build and maintaining those clients and doing a lot of that work. And so, again, it's just about what you're looking for, what you're trying to do with the websites.
Yeah, and that's also to say there's sharks on both sides of the field.
Yes.
So like if you have, I've seen some people that charge an outrageous amount for a Squarespace site that is literally just a template that they put up. Not discrediting the amount of style that goes into that and that kind of stuff and the man hours that went to get the site exactly right, but sometimes it is just blatantly a bad deal for the customer. But at the same time, you have people who are building good sites that hand off to people that they can actually update on their own and stuff, so there is value there.
It's probably a good point to make that you just need to make sure you're vetting, all of these things, whether you're a developer or not. Anytime you're engaging someone to build or do things digitally for you, there should be some level of vetting. I think with that, unless you have anything specific from a pros and cons, we're going to take the last 15 or so and open it up for questions.
I would say on the design side of things, Squarespace is really well set up for responsive design, which is really important now in a very mobile environment. And what I mean by responsive design is that if you actually downscale, it automatically will downscale the site based on what device you're using. So if you're using an iPhone, or even if you have a browser up on your computer and you just make the tab smaller, it scales it down automatically, rather than somebody who is visiting your site on a non-responsive site seeing just a tiny little picture on their phone that they have to really scroll into, which WordPress definitely has the ability to do, but some sites just aren't set up that way.
Most modern WordPress, I can't imagine I'm sure you can go find themes that are not responsive.
Right.
Most modern WordPress themes are going to be responsive. They're going to adapt to the size of the screen no matter what device you're on. What you run into and why a lot of the WordPress sites are not responsive is because they were built with old themes that have not been updated. They're built on technology that hasn't been. A lot of times what will happen is, let's say you got a site custom developed and you put a bunch of plugins on it and it's stable in its current state. Well, they'll ship that out and they'll just never update it, because as long as you don't update any of the components, you can never break anything, right? So that means you don't really get any new functionality, but you're also not going to break anything. But that means that a year from now, 2 years from now, when things have changed, your website's still going to be fairly static, and the odds are being able to update that site at that point is going to be very difficult, if not impossible. So
right, I think, and the only other note is on the e-commerce side. So if you're selling products, Squarespace has a plan that is really easy to add products to and manage your products in Squarespace, very quick out of the box, and it's actually very comparable to a lot of the other kind of tools out there. I'm a certified Shopify expert as well, which is one of the biggest e-commerce platforms in the world. But even then, some of the clients that I see that need e-commerce sites, I just recommend a Squarespace because they don't need a lot. If they don't have like a very robust catalog of stuff that they need, I just say throw it on Squarespace, because then you have everything you need easily set up on that. And Shopify has some definite problems with like, content distribution and stuff like that. But WordPress also just, do you want
Yeah,
to
and you can do the same. I mean, WordPress has WooCommerce, which is a free e-commerce. There's other free e-commerce tools. Again, the benefit that you get through Squarespace is that it's baked in, it's native. One of the interesting things is that Automatic just acquired WooCommerce 6 months, 8 months ago or so. And so I presume the reason they did that was to bake it in natively, because they saw things like that, because so many people are trying to sell and build businesses out of their website, that needs to be a basic native function. And so while WordPress is a little tougher to get started on the e-commerce side, just because you have to have a separate plugin and configure that, it's not that big a hurdle, and it's also something that's fairly robust inside the WordPress platform, is that e-commerce tools.
Right, and that's one thing that, like, with another agency that I worked at in the past, we built an e-commerce platform, and we would actually build for any of the sites that we launched. If a client needed a blog, we would actually just build them and add it on WordPress blog. So we would actually have that on a separate, not domain, but like a subdomain, and so they would actually be able to put out a lot of content really well. And we did that because WordPress is just one of the best for just blogging. I mean, just blogging. And so having that added capability of also having the e-commerce platform native on WordPress would be a huge deal for them to be able to catch up with.
And I think we'll see a lot of those updates coming from Automatic, from WordPress, the community. They're updating more and more regularly. The updates are getting more and more substantial. And I think over the next few years, we will see a kind of a leveling of that playing field, if you will. I hope, at least, right? I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. I can just imagine that if those guys have brains like mine, and probably better, I'm thinking of these ideas, and so they must be thinking of a lot of these things as well, right? So again, the tools are there. Some of them are a little more hodgepodge, again, a la carte. I appreciate the flexibility, the community, and a lot about WordPress. Sean obviously likes the simplicity and the ease of use, and there's nothing wrong with either approach to the website building, right?
It's just personal preference.
Yeah, as long as you can get your content onto the internet, and as long as you can share that with the world, what else matters, right? It just comes to your personal preference, what you're looking to do, and where you're looking to take that website into the future. So with that, we'll wrap up.
Were there any other questions? First off?
Well, we're at time, so we're going to wrap up regardless. We will be we'll be here if you guys want to hang out. If you have questions you'd like to ask off camera or whatever, we'll be here for that too. Cool. More pizza, eat that up. If not, I got to take it to the bar. They like it when I bring pizza, so